Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 315. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and I am back again with Estonian fan favorite guest, Mr. Priit Mihkelson. Priit, how's it going, sir?
I'm doing good, like I always say these days. It's double life, so one way okay, one way great.
Well, I just saw you hanging out with some friends of the show, Chris Paines and Rob Bernacki. I actually just had Chris on the show recently, and I'm sure we're going to have Rob back at some time soon. So how did that go? The three of you in a room together is something that's hard to imagine.
Yeah, didn't like it at all. Yeah, awkward, just, no. I met Rob the first time now. Obviously I've seen his videos and stuff. So, he's a confident character. So I wanted to see him, how he does the game stuff. Obviously, I was interested. So Chris invited me to participate that he was going around. So I met him at Chris' place. And I would say we got along. And as an Estonian, maybe I would be adjacent, whatever the word is, to call him my friend, but because I only met him once in this. But I think we got along and we understood each other. And maybe he even laughed at my jokes. And, so I think we're good acquaintances.
Well, I know you, Priit. I know you well enough to know that as long as people laugh at your terrible jokes, you love them. That's all you're looking for in life.
Yes,
so
yes.
I am glad that you guys got along. And it's actually interesting that we've got you here after you just had that meetup, because I think it might inform this conversation a little bit. But what I was thinking we could talk about based on our chat earlier was defensive angles. You've been on the podcast before, and I've heard some of your content where you've talked about the angle that you should keep relative to the ground when you're defending. Very common thing for people to think about when they're grappling, because of course we know you don't want to be pinned onto the mat with both your shoulders down. There's also risks to coming straight up to your side because you can expose yourself to head control and to kimuras and arm bars. But you had talked about how you've developed a bit more nuance around this idea of like, what angle should you take when you're defending? How should you position your body relative to the floor and relative to your opponent? But maybe I'll turn that over to you and you can kind of talk about your thinking and how that's evolved.
Yeah, so I've been finding those postures we call hawking and baby bridge and running man, and those we call them like a staggered stances. We have some neutral ones. So, those sitting turtles, aka panda, turtle, head on a mat, those older versions. So, and, I've been basically constraining myself to bottom positions and trying to figure out certain patterns there. And those are the ones we have found so far. But when we talked about the, let's say, staggered stances, staggered means they're not neutral. If you would be in turtle, both knees, elbows on a mat, let's say, that would be neutral. If you be like one butt and one elbow on a mat, and then it would be more staggered version. So staggered in that context. So, and a lot of my structures are kind of weird angled. So I'm trying to obviously not give them my back and also kind of keep them off my chest to chest connection, because then certain things are easier. That's what they want. They want that heavy chest to chest. That's why side control is sometimes called like 100 kilos and everything. So, but what happened was, because I knew what I was doing, obviously because I'm in side control bottom, I'm doing my angles. So I have all the context why I'm doing certain things. And I had a hard time, let's say, passing on that context. And I passed on structures, and they were a bit like in a vacuum. So obviously if we did enough work, they started to work and people understood them better. But also very often I get the question, like, show me, just just recently, somebody posted in like maybe 2 days ago, somebody in Reddit. And so Prit, how do you use that? And what's the context? And so that's been the question that has bothered me because obviously, like I said, I know the context and I know they're useful. And I don't understand, I could say that's why people have a hard time finding how useful they are, So I always consider it like my fault, it's not theirs. And now I think because of the constraint-led approach, we found a better way, not the best way, but obviously better than before, a better way to introduce context around those structures. And we can actually make those structures appear in those, situations, games, task drills, whatever we call them these days. And one of the main things is how I explain it at first would be like the shoulder to the chest. You create the T, so letter T. So if the opponent's chest is the top flat side of the T, then your shoulders are stacked in a way that it forms the TI part, the straight part. So I'm always trying to keep them at that angle so they will not get chest to chest or chest to back. Obviously, they have to fight for those and they can jab and cross, they can fake one, do the other. So I have to have a skill to maintain that angle. So they're kind of at bay for achieving both. And so, before when we talked about the structures, if I do them like myself without the opponent sometimes, then we can talk about, this is like a 40 degree angle. And because I knew when I actually do it myself, sometimes angle varies, they're a little bit more higher up, they're lower down. So I kind of adjust my angle, but I had a hard time explaining that, and if you don't have that adaptability with the angle, people get stuck because then they don't maintain that, let's say the T that we think it's more useful. So at the moment we're using that kind of thing that I'm keeping my shoulder to your chest and you try to achieve whichever means, pulling my elbows, pushing me, whatever, you try to achieve that chest to back connection. And then you get your stuff. And obviously, there's more depth to that. If you even get chest to chest, obviously you want to lock the arms or have some meaningful grip. And we can still keep going and deeper to, make it really hard and, control your wrist and stuff. And so there's games and stuff we can play to make sense of that. So in a way, I found like a way better context for my stuff through those task-focused games. And that approach, constraint approach, kind of allowed me to do that. And now we can build way easier depth into the structures, chest to chest, chest to back. And you said also if somebody's sideways, let's say you would think traditionally, you capture their head, you go to north-south kind of, they're sideways, you sit on their head and you take Kimura's example. So there's ways to, first of all, we can do games to keep our head free. And if even they get underhooks, we can repummel, we can have certain games. So in my head, I call it like a dome. So you can't get chest to chest, chest to back, and also from the top, let's say Kimuras or Torikoplatas or arm bars, whatever it is, we can also defend them. And obviously sports happens and somebody wins, somebody loses, but we can make sense of that skill. So that's, I guess, my idea was, and I was happy that I stumbled on a method that allowed me to build a way better context. So overall, that is what we're talking about here.
Makes sense. Now, I realize that we should probably spend a bit of time talking about what makes your work in jiu-jitsu a little bit different. Because I know, of course, you've been on the podcast many, many times, but as you can probably gather, well over 300 episodes of these, a common problem we often have is that people understandably haven't listened to every single conversation we've ever done. So I'll explain maybe how I look at your work, Prit, and then you tell me how you feel I've explained it. And if we agree that this is a decent definition, then we can kind of go forward and talk about this process of establishing good defensive angles. A lot of the work that you do, of course, you're best known for defensive BJJ. So focusing on, I would say you're kind of in a lot of ways kind of close to like a researcher in jiu-jitsu where you've got an area of specialty and you're putting a lot of effort into trying to figure out the nuances of that game to kind of look for breakthroughs or maybe things that people haven't seen before. And one of the things that's interesting about a lot of your positions is many of them come from a very late stage defense situation. So hawking, for example, you talked about. For those who don't know, hawking is basically a way to defend yourself from bottom side control when your frames, your hand frames, are really not working properly. And it took me a while to kind of get my head around your system, because I remember the first time I saw hawking, I thought, okay, that's interesting, but why do I need this? Because I already have a lot of really good side control defenses and escapes. What does this thing do for me that those don't? And the way that someone explained it to me that really made a lot of sense was you can still use the existing stuff you're doing, but something like hawking, that kind of assumes that your ability to get your hands in and use them as frames has been totally shut down, right? I mean, we can talk about how, yes, you should use your hands as frames to create space, but sometimes you just get stuck and you can't do that if the person's got you really pinned. And that's where hawking can add one more layer of defense when you're not really able to use your hands effectively as frames anymore. And what you're talking about here, if I understand correctly, is when my hands fail. So I've been pinned in such a way that I cannot frame against your bicep or your neck or whatever I want to do. Now what frames can I use to keep you off of me and keep you from getting a chest-to-chest connection? And the last option that you've really got is to use your own shoulder. And so you can kind of angle your body towards your opponents so that they never have that good angle to get chest to back, while at the same time making sure that you're not giving them a good enough angle to get something like an arm bar, per se. Is that a good way to explain this?
Yes, I'll add to it. So, yeah, I know the frame thing dominates jiu-jitsu. I'm not against that, but I guess I agree with you that the thinking would be, what if the frames fail? What if I'm late? What if I'm tired, So there has to be, for me, it would be like what I do is like a boxing stance when my arms are very close to me. And then, frames would be reaching out with my arms and, punching and grabbing somebody's boxing gloves, MMA, like MMA gloves. So frames are awesome. They have a Muay Thai, like clinch frames and stuff, but also where the frame's coming from. So in one way, I agree that, if you just try to pin me, what do I do? How do I stay safe from everything basically you want to do without, trying to push you always framing? Because with frames, the problem is you can't really keep them for long. They're usually there to bump you off a bit and get your knees and legs in front, but you can't go I will hold that frame 1 minute, So, and what do I do if I can't hold it 1 minute or 10 seconds? How do I stay safe? And then maybe get my arms, let's say in front of me, I frame something, try to get my knees and legs in front of you, or I use some other ways of escape, because there's a lot of turning away escapes also that we can use. And so that hawking structure, I guess I'm also in my work, I'm moving away from the names. I guess I created those names, but also sometimes I try to use them less because the context allows it. There's also a way to use that kind of structure, what we do, like little bit one shoulder off the mat and, kind of crunched on one side. We can also use that structure when somebody has grips on us. But basically, like if somebody pins us, I would still try to get that crunch position even when they have, grips around me. So, and I would try to maybe use even traditional framing from those structures. But yeah, overall, that's maybe hard to explain maybe in the podcast right now. But overall, yes, I agree that I'm using, if my arms are failing, I'm using a shoulder as a frame to keep them kind of away from me, because they have hard time. Definitely if I'm doing it from side control, let's say, because from side control, I'm not like a vertical to the mat, like a 90 degrees, because I would be, let's say 45, 60, somewhere there, because they're trying to get side control as I'm keeping my chest, keeping my shoulder to the chest. So, and it's not the most comfortable Kimura and let's say the armbar angle even for there to attack. And there's always ways to keep my elbows at check so nothing fast will happen there. But yeah, the kind of like in jiu-jitsu, they talk a lot about self-framing, in open guard, people self-frame their knee. So the torandos will not happen because the palm is supporting knee and elbow is on a mat and you have that kind of good structure. So I really enjoyed the name, that self-frame. So I don't know how to call it. If I'm keeping my arms very close to me, I'm not using it on you. Is it also some kind of self-frame? And also, how do you call the shoulder frame that's actually pushed into their chest? Kind of also you're framing by self or something, So I think we also maybe need some categorization of the self-frame, because At the moment, we only have one, let's say I use for open guard, but I think we need more deeper understanding or names because there's also different ways. But yeah, so overall, like I said, I agree with you that my stuff is like, that's why we call them 0 points also, like where stuff comes from. If everything fails, what do you do? And obviously I'm not against frames and you can obviously try them, but if you fail, I would even give you a visual like this, that if somebody's, try to use frames to put your knees in, but let's say they fail and they start to like come closer and the arms are start to collapse. And there comes a point when it's like they get chest to chest and they pin and then you're stuck, or you feel like, okay, my frames are failing. You turn your shoulder in, more like a sideways, like a create that T, and they land on that pike, basically, that side pike, and they still can't have access to you. And then you can rest because it's obviously, then we don't call this position 100 kilos because it's very hard to put weight on me and it's easier to breathe. And then you try to maybe do some turning away escape or try to get your arms in again, face them, and try to escape again. But you have ways to manage that terrible position you almost ended up. Because obviously if you end up chest to chest, somebody squeezes, you lose oxygen, you panic, and it's not very comfortable to be there. So my thing started always with how to make ourselves comfortable in side control bottom. So we actually like to be there and we're not doing like panic reaction defenses. And then, then we find a way out, but we're comfortable there. And if we're not comfortable, we are doing some, panic reactions trying to get out. And then we are also vulnerable because might take some wrong chances and then people can expose us. So my job originally, I guess, was to find the most comfortable ways playing bottom positions. So I can choose whenever I want to escape. I can force it. I can wait for your transition and then escape, or in some cases, I can just make you quit and give you nothing, and maybe you just abandon position yourself, So I'm for all options, but yeah, my research is more about how to become annoying, and some call it stalling, but actually I'm getting closer to 0. So what minimal things we can do to survive, and then we build everything back up. So that'll be like a short introduction. It's a joke.
So what do you mean here when you talk about getting to 0? That's terminology I haven't heard before. So maybe if I haven't heard it, other people haven't either. I'd love to hear you explain that a bit more.
So 0 point. So I would even call, let's say these days, maybe we know more about turtle because we're using also straight arm turtle. And now I'm using elbows on a mat and head on a mat. And turtle has grown since we started 2017. But we still, let's say, 0 point where complexity starts. Because I would say in side control, 0 point cannot be somebody has, cross face underhook. They connect their arms. They have chest to chest. They squeeze you. And from there, you have your, let's say, beginning escaping. Yeah. I think that is so terrible. I don't have words. Yeah. But it's still happening in jiu-jitsu. I would give you like a visual like this. I think that, let's say, some kind of maybe closed guard would be top, would be even good position to start with. So closed guard 0 point, very often people, they have posture up, let's say. And then the idea is that I'm staying safe in closed guard top. My job is to give you nothing and take from you everything. And then I'm trying to open the legs. Nobody starts teaching closed guard top from the position, okay, bottom guy, you have an arm drag, or bottom guy already has an overhook or some kind of arm bar position. And then they go, okay, now you open the legs. It's too late. So we have a closed guard. We have agreed that it's a good starting point of, let's say you're on your knees, you have posture up, and you try to defend all the pull downs and everything else, keep it very safe, and now try to open the legs. So that's the, I think, reasonable idea of how to teaching people how to be the safe first. In mount, we tend to do the similar thing. We have that some people are flat, they put both arms on the hips and they start mostly there. I would argue you should be on your side, not flat, if you have that structure, but, so be it. But somehow in side control, you typically start with cross-face underhook. So you have given so much away already. And it's like starting like an opening legs with somebody has an arm drag on you from close guard. And the first day you teach that, and then it's like, oh, try to open the legs. It's already too far. So In side control, I think that 0 point where we had shoulder to the chest, let's say, and they have no dominant grips basically, and I'm safe to explore. I'm not under pressure. I'm not getting submitted fast. And that's a good point to start. I give them nothing and I take from them everything. And then I build my stuff from there. And also then, if I'm so confident, I can let people have crossface underhook and I'm okay to escape from there. But it's a skill. Either somebody puts me there and I can also practice. Same with the arm drag from close guard. Same actually, that inconsistency with positional escapes also happens in back. Because mostly people start from the back, they have hooks in, and they have a seatbelt most likely right away. Your harness, seatbelt, whatever you call it. I think that's also already too far in. Maybe the first, actually, that 0 points should start like my elbows are close, and you can actually grab both of my biceps outside, understand? Or I have certain angle on you already, like certain defensive stuff I do, like maybe I've turned my body already on an angle. That's, let's say, if you're, let's say, holding my back, you sit on both of your cheeks and I'm in your lap, but I already have certain angle, maybe even like a, shoulder to the chest. And this would be like very good position because, okay, you're, holding a little bit, but I have that shoulder to the chest and my escaping ability is way better. And if I get to that position, I can do most escapes. And then I maybe turn my back more to you and then you have a double biceps and then we get to the seatbelt grip. But those are already like stuff that has happened and you have given away. We should have a 0 point to start from that gives like a defender a really good start, like a beginner. They're really hard to hold and everybody can basically turn around, get chest to chest, So 0 points for me are those positions that we can start build complexity from. And we put beginners in certain positions that we train them from there. And then we make it harder, so to speak. There is a starting point, I would say. That's what I mean, 0.
Makes sense. Something that we talk about here on the podcast is this notion that you are what you train. And by that, I mean the way that you structure your training environment and the things that you focus on and the things you do there, that's going to be the way that you actually wind up fighting. Many years ago, I heard Stefan Kesting talk about how a common mistake that people make with how they think about jiu-jitsu is they look at it as this collection of 5 or 6 different positions, but they don't really think about the stuff that happens in between. And I think a lot of that comes to the way that we explain jiu-jitsu to newcomers and also the way that we encourage them to train. So you brought up a great example. When we tell people that we're going to start practicing bottom side control defense, we often start them in this terrible position where they've already given up the crossface. They've already been pinned chest to chest. Both their shoulders are on the mat and they have to fight out of there. And if that is the only way that you ever train side control, then whether you realize it or not, in your head, you're ingraining this definition of, oh, okay, this is side control. And you're not looking at the things that can happen in between transitions. So as you brought up, much of the defense when it comes to defending from side control, it happens before that position is really settled. If you get to the point where someone has chest to chest on you and a crossface, you've already lost all of the best opportunities to get out of there. And so this is where I think things like the constraints-led approach, as you mentioned earlier, have a lot of power, because instead of telling people to think in terms of these defined positions, you can give them a game that gives them a wider variety of things to practice. Because that is a problem that a lot of people have, is they think of side control is I have my shoulders on the mat, I'm being pinned chest to chest, I've given up my crossface. And so what sometimes people will do is when they feel like their guard is sort of past, they'll just kind of give up side control because that's what they're comfortable with. But if you do that, you've lost those opportunities in between to get out of there or establish a better version of side control before you just get crushed. So I like that idea of 0 point, basically figuring out where in the training process we start from. And I also see your point about how that can change depending on your experience. These days, when I spar with someone, I often just straight up let them pass my guard. By that, I mean, I will kind of set up a seated guard, but I'm not really trying to maintain or sweep from there. I am letting them get around me or get to my back because it handicaps me and it gives me the option to fight from a far worse position, which when you get experienced can be very helpful, and it makes the role kind of more balanced for both people involved.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually one just extra thought would be, I've heard, let's say, more black belts. They kind of pick up defense or let's say higher belts, they pick up defense late. And let's say they're brown belts or black belts, and then they pick up defense. And I start to do those, let's say, whatever the deep stuff, getting deeper in trouble, developing some stuff against, whites and blues and stuff. And I actually, sometimes people have told me that like good defense is a high level skill that you usually pick up later. But I actually totally disagree, because we can start to build those habits already early on, and then in a brown and black belt level, maybe they start to work pretty nicely. But I'm not saying also, people don't do it earlier, some way defense, but we should give them like a good things early on, shoulder to the chest, not getting pinned. And also, how do you, other side of the coin would be, how do you teach people top positions? If they always get chest to chest because it's given to them, do they really know, like, are they good pinners or not? Because if people are trained to let them to that position, and they don't have like deeper knowledge, then how do you become a good top player? So it's, I think it's very dangerous also to not teach like really this avoidance defense, those, let's say the 0 points, not getting pinned, knowing this. You have to teach people turning in, turning away, because that's the only way you get better at top, because then you actually earn things. You take the back, you pin the person that doesn't want to get pinned and doesn't want to get like back taken and knows what to do in turtle and everything else. So I find that this kind of avoidance defense very early, give them nothing and take from them everything. I think it's really, really awesome tool for beginners. And then if they get like safe enough, like I said earlier, they want to actually experience the harder things. And then they choose to do them themselves. And then if they suffer, it's easier because they chose that, because not every role should be, like a death to the, fight for the death. You should also explore. So what we find, I think, like people are willing to maybe explore better, and suffering has a different meaning because you chose this for yourself. And then I think it's easier mentally also, because if you're taught that your escape starts from side control when somebody has those positions, then I think it's really difficult, and that's what you end up doing a lot of the early years, mount bottom, somebody takes your back, and side control and stuff. And also what I find when we explain that difference and it's inconsistency with like we see consistency with let's say a close guard top, some mount stuff. Nobody starts mount escapes with, okay, I have a double underhooks from top and then do a mount escape. It's too late already, But you also want to explore that, but later. But sometimes what answer I've gotten from people that is like, if I tell them, yeah, you should start escaping from crossface underhook, then the answer would be always like, but how do you do side control then? It's like, obviously there's some other, grips that have a crossface grip, and you can also put the arm around the hip, so the arms are on the same side. So you don't have like connected arms. So there's other grips, but traditionally I find it sometimes, I don't know, funny, amusing, also weird that people have that reaction that, but how do you do, what kind of side control do you take? Because, if you avoid that and give me, let's say your shoulder to the chest, then side control becomes weird, it's actually not attainable the way you're taught. So, and then whose position is it? Is it actually a side control? Or, I know Greg Souders likes to talk about there's no side control, So in some way, I also agree with him. So I think people have that kind of traditional thinking of side control. And, also, like I said, the back stuff. Okay, start with a seatbelt. Why would you start like defending, escaping from the seatbelt? There's earlier reactions that people can actually have. And why do we teach them? Like also, like if you take any YouTube video about the back take, it's always like a rolling back take, let's say from the half guard, the twister side control, rolling back take. And magically everybody gets a seatbelt. You could pick any YouTube video blindly, go like berimbolo to the back. I promise you, it's like, they expose the back and somehow defender's arms are perfectly open and the top person attacking gets a seatbelt. What you should get is maybe double bicep grip, or just, it shouldn't be like underhook and crossface, like given. So that is also the way jiu-jitsu is programmed, So people see that and they think it's norm, but I think it's like a weird habit that we're presenting that defensively is not correct, that very likely the attacker will not get a seatbelt. And very likely you will end up controlling like a double bicep, let's say even like an NCAA control, and then you fight from there. You get a back exposure. You can easily, the double bicep block is really awesome. You can control people rotation. And then from there, you maybe fight for a deeper control, but that's a fight. And you never know because they have a defensive skills. So I see it more like that, And then when people get stuck and can't escape, it's like you created that monster yourself, So that's what I mean. It's like there is more to the zero, more to the start of the like a good habits that we can give people. And then sport happens, obviously. Things happen. And sometimes from the rolling back take, also seatbelt might happen, but it also might not. So it's not guaranteed. So that's what I'm saying. So if I'm defensively solid, let's say, then I can choose also, it all depends on my tiredness and everything else, obviously. But it shouldn't be like I'm expected to get it. And I actually think it should be more like an exception of the rule. And you should expect something else, actually. So that's why I'm fascinated by the zero, because of the inconsistency that I noticed early on. And the close guard will be perfectly, like everybody tries to be, perfectly early and cancel everything, and just open and not get in trouble. And why we're not doing this every other position. So why that inconsistency is in jiu-jitsu. So that's my whole point.
I think the mistake many people make when they structure classes is they do everything from the context of these predefined positions. But then when we go off to roll, it's open season and the goal is just to win however you want to do it. And so you mentioned earlier that many people think of defense as a black belt skill or a high level skill. I agree with you that it doesn't have to be that way. However, often I think it is. And that's just because of the way that people train, which is that they don't really prioritize learning good defense at a lower level. If you're training at I guess the way that most people train, when you have an open roll, you're playing with the same goals as a competition. You're trying to win however you want to win. You're not necessarily going in there with the goal of focusing on good defense. So what happens, at least from my experience, I remember getting all the way up to brown belt. When I was rolling with someone, I was just trying to win. And if I'm better than them, I'm probably going to spend more time on offense than on defense. So I don't really get a chance to work that skill set. And it's not until you sit down and you decide, I want to really deliberately make a plan out of training my defense, that you actually start to develop that skill set. And I think that's an area, as you brought up, with the clever use of constraints in games, that a coach can help put things into a better direction where students can learn that in the beginning, because you change the goal of the class so that it's not about winning, but rather it's about developing these particular skill sets. So I'll get into this in a little bit, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about how to play these kinds of games. But tying this back to our mutual friend, Rob Bernacki, touching on some of the things you just mentioned, you talked about how Greg Souders often says that side control isn't really a thing. That aligns with something I've heard Rob talk about, which is the idea that we should prioritize maintaining our body's alignment over worrying about whatever position you're in. So to the example that you brought up, sometimes if I'm on bottom side control, it's terrible for me. But other times, if I'm on bottom side control, I'm actually not really in a bad position, and I feel like I could get out in a second or two if I wanted to. And the difference is how you've aligned your body. And that kind of ties into the stuff that you're talking about. If I'm letting you get that cross face on me, or I'm letting you pull my arm free or occupy my elbow knee space, yeah, it's a bad side control. But if I'm preventing you from doing those things, and you as the top player cannot get a cross face, you cannot pin me chest to chest, you cannot occupy my elbow knee space, even if it looks like you've got side control on me, I'm going to be out of there in a second because there's nothing really holding me there. But to an untrained eye, those two positions might look the same. So I think that's kind of in line with what you're talking about. And that's, as I mentioned, a mental model that Rob talks about. He calls it alignment over position, and the idea that the position itself is less relevant. What's more relevant is our body in a state to adequately defend ourselves from that position?
Yes. So I think I've heard also Greg talked about like there's no double leg and stuff. And let's say maybe I'm not in level of understanding this, but also maybe some of the discussions are also so much away from the mat, But for me, side control means like everything, Because let's say we can definitely like jiu-jitsu difference, side control, then it's north-south and everything. So we can define like this. For me, side control is everything upper body. Are you in perpendicular? Are you parallel to him, like north-south, or your other side? So it's like what is that? 180 degrees around him, avoiding the legs, And I guess some kind of names are useful, but I think jiu-jitsu, I also, agree with this. What is side control? Is the hips are this, hips are that? If that grip is side control, it's jiu-jitsu terminology is kind of bad. So we just have a top position, we're past the legs, so legs are not involved. It's a pinning top position. And maybe you can differentiate, like I said, side control north-south is one, like a top control pin. And you can differentiate maybe mount, let's say something else. Or if everything is just covering hips and shoulders, like some people like to think. Or also we can categorize like, one is on them, so to speak, and one is off them, only chest is on them and legs are away. So I think names as side control is, it's not very beneficial. And in jiu-jitsu, I don't know if there's some discussions how to name things better, but names are bad in jiu-jitsu. And some people are very happy with them, but also, what comes to just holding positions. And if you watch matches, so many other things happen that are not classically side control. And so how do we define them? So we need a better definition for top control, So maybe it's that simple, top control. Chest to chest, you have a pin, top control. So, and however it manifests, north, south, side control, chest facing the legs, chest, facing the head, turned away, kind of kesakatames, whatever, or mount, it's just top position where I cover the hips and the shoulders. So in a way, those kind of ecological way of thinking about things. And they also, I really enjoy that dumbed down version of all of those. And, basically, everything you need is a top control is chest to chest, chest to back. And then you take attachment what you can. So I really enjoy this kind of, even I would say maybe dumbed down or also slim down. I would also, I guess, agree with rope, it's just alignment, And for me, I've been promoting this idea that at whose position it actually is. We can all agree that if I'm in side control bottom, top person is on top. But I don't know, I haven't thought about it, how to systemize all the terminology. But I would say also, it depends whose position it is. Because I can lead from the bottom. I can take something away from you. So your position is not actually under your full control. And we both have chances, I would say. So there's also, definitely top positions that are more towards the top player and they have more dominant. But I would go that far even saying like I can make, what comes to, things without punching, I would say in grappling, I can make them even. I can make defensive structures even. So bottom and top, I would like to think that they are even. Some people would argue, no, top is still top because they have gravity and everything else. But also I would say bottom person has some advantages that balances out that gravity, in a way. But I also understand when people tend to disagree, and I don't mind. So because it's not even that much thought out. But I would say there is a way to make bottom positions way more even to the top than people think. And leading from the bottom is what people feel when they, let's say, roll with me, because I take certain things away from them that they need. And it's then they're like feeling really weird. It's like I'm in top, but I don't feel in control. So that's like typical feedback they will get from me. So that's also the alignment, or, that's also a vague idea. I don't know how to put it in a jar, so to speak. What is it? But as an idea, I can talk about it. So.
Yeah, you bring up a great point about the impact that naming conventions can have on the sport. I think people often look for this perfect definition, one way to explain things that will always be true. And I don't know if that really exists across much of jiu-jitsu, just because we're not talking about something like mathematics. We're talking about how two bodies can kind of fight across from each other, and it's not simple math. It's not as simple as there's one definition that will always apply, at least not from my experience. And I think sometimes the challenge with how we name things is when you start giving things names, you make people think that the names are all that there is, and there's nothing in between the names. And you bring up, again, a great point about how you can be on bottom position, but still be fighting quite effectively. On the other hand, you can also be on bottom position and getting crushed. And those might look like the same position to someone. And the problem is if we hide behind these predefined labels too much, we run the risk of failing to teach our students the nuance of how you can play these things differently. An example I often give is if you are a white belt or a blue belt and you ever get on top of a brown belt or a black belt in top side control, you've probably felt this where you technically have the position, but you just really don't feel like there's anything holding the person there, and they could get out at any time they want. And then eventually they will. And the reason why there's that difference is because that brown belt or black belt is preventing you from having the things that you need to really hold that position in place. And maybe that's as good a time as any to kind of dig a little bit deeper into what those things are. So you talked earlier about the importance of measuring your angle relative to the other person. That is sometimes called force vectors. So understanding the angle of the force that's coming in and making sure that you're matching that. The example I often give is think of a kickstand on a bicycle or a motorcycle. If the kickstand is propped up at the correct angle, that tiny piece of metal can hold the entire bike's weight up without any issue. But if the kickstand bends or isn't set properly to the right angle, then the whole thing's going to collapse. And the difference between this works versus this doesn't work can often just be a matter of 1 or 2 degrees. So often when you are on the bottom, when you're trying to use frames to defend, whether that's your hand or your shoulder, you want that frame to be lined up to your opponent so that you are kind of acting like a kickstand. You can brace against them. And what the person on top is trying to do is change the angle because they want to collapse that kickstand. They want to get around that frame rather than trying to break it, which is way harder to do. So that's why when people are playing top side control, for example, so much of the game is about changing the angle and moving and switching your hips. It's because you're trying to find that angle where you can collapse that other person's kickstand and break their frame. And I think that's very similar to what you're talking about here. When you talk about kind of making a T relative to the other person's body, it sounds like the same thing.
Yeah. So interesting. Like you can, that kind of, the T is kind of kickstand, you know? So the T is usually how I would start, like day one things. And then now we have a method to also teach them to play with fire. So you can start to, let's say, turn your back more if you want, or turn your chest more if you want, because the T becomes so boring. So it's easy, let's say. And the point is to figure out the range. What can you do? So you start to turn more your chest in. Obviously, they start to, line their chest more and more pressure comes in. But then your game becomes, how do I, let's say, control their grips, nullify their grips, keep their arms disattached. So you can still actually turn pretty chest to chest and still control. People do those games against crossface. They're blocking the crossface with a free arm. So that kind of keeps everything loose. You can do the same thing with turning away, and they turn away. They start to get like chest to back, but your job is to actually obviously not give them underhooks. If you want to give them underhooks, keep their arms open, control their wrist and stuff, grab their fingers. And so it's hard to get the chokes and stuff. So you play with fire, and then you find out how much you can play, because all their chokes, basically what comes to gi chokes, they happen because of the underhooks. So if you avoid underhooks, then there's not much gi chokes you can actually do without underhooks. Everybody needs usually seatbelt to choke you. So that kind of space, and then you start to play with fire. And then I found it very, very fascinating these days to try to teach depth and not be so early and then be very late and be early and be in the middle. And then people can choose everything how they want to play, because obviously I have so much time to do this because that's the only thing I do, basically. That's my interest. And other people have other stuff they want to good at. So then people can choose how much they want to invest, what kind of defense they want to have. And there's methods to go deeper if they want in some point, but there's also to keep it very early, very like safe, so to speak, because they have less time to do it, let's say. And so never everybody has to play like me, so that was never the point. I just try to create information about it, and then people use it as they use. So that's been also fascinating, that because I was always afraid that creating clones, that I usually say that the people shouldn't teach what they're good at. They should teach what made them good. So it's very often that people become coaches and they teach their game. And then you just have like mini-me's walking around. So we should actually teach what made you discover who you are. So, but with me, it's kind of like a joke because my game is very fundamental. I'm looking for zeros that are the same to everyone. And then we expand, and then we discover the creativity. And I like to play this way. I like to do that. If you have longer legs, you can introduce buggy chokes very early. And if you have shorter legs, you will not do that. So I don't mind those exceptions. Because the key is always you never pass on your deviation. You pass on the foundation, the zero, and so everybody can find out their deviation. So now it's very fun that different things will happen, but they're based on similar rules, and then people can find who they are, how they like to play. Stockier guys, longer legs, guard players, turtles, more wrestlers. So they can all put different attachment to that. So that's also been a very enjoyable part when I've been teaching this. So
there's a concept that you once taught me that, for lack of a better term, I've called Prit's 45-degree rule for defending from the bottom. And the way that you explained it to me at the time was when someone kills your legs. So basically what this means most of the time is when someone is past your guard and they're in a dominant topside position, like side control or mount or whatever, you want to be 45 degrees relative to the floor. So the reason why is because if I have both my shoulders flat on the mat, so I'm not 45 degrees, I'm just parallel to the floor. If I have both of my shoulders down, I'm giving up the chest to chest pin. And if I flip around the other way and I've got both of my shoulders down and I'm belly down, that's even worse because now I'm giving up back mount and it's very hard to defend from there. But the other thing too is if you're all the way up on your side at a straight 90-degree angle, perpendicular to the floor, there's other problems that can occur there. The most common one is I'm exposing myself to things like kimuras and arm bars, and I also make it a bit easier for the person to wrap around my neck. So something that you had said is when the person clears your legs, you want to be 45 degrees relative to the floor. So that often means having one shoulder up, one shoulder down. And if you think of all of the good defenses and ways to get out of bottom side control, most people will probably understand this pattern and think of examples where this makes sense. And how if you go all the way up to your side at 90 degrees, now you can be in a bit of a danger zone because you're opening up your back, you're opening up attacks on your top arm, like we talked about earlier. But it sounds like what you're saying is that you've since added this other layer of nuance around this about kind of angling yourself relative to your opponent. I'm just wondering, since we talked about that 45-degree rule, what are the other nuances and details that you would add on top of that weren't there before the last time we spoke?
So what threw a wrench into the system, because I would agree that then a 45-ish thing would apply when I would play side, when somebody would be side. But then the 45 rule it's harder when they are in mount. Then I would actually turn myself sideways. I have like Globetrotter videos about it also, mount escape, and people can Google. I have that hip frame. Demi and Maya does that, and I use it a lot. I've seen Stephen Kesting right now put the DVD out. I think he was showing that. And there's other examples. But then, because they're just top of me, I cannot take like 45 because it's still pretty close to chest. So I always felt that I have to be sideways because my shoulder had to look to their chest. And then the 45 rule was like, something's wrong. Here I have to stay 90. But the 45-ish things will happen again when they start to move, because if I have that elbow frame, elbow push to the center line and cupping the hip, if they try to go around me and go to my back, elbow frame actually does a pretty good job of avoiding that, so it's always a fight. Then I start to go again more 45 because they start to go around my back, so I'm following them with my shoulder, so it becomes more that 45-ish. And if they go more front, so to speak, try to get my chest from the mount, I actually turn more, keep pushing my elbow, and my chest turns towards the mat more. So it seems to be more like usable when the angle is towards the opponent. And so 45, I think I used them. Obviously, I used them, and I think, as I remember, it was something I did. But I also was like, yeah, but I use also this and this and this. But as a maybe starting point or just as an idea, it was 45. And when I teach those structures in a vacuum, so to speak, like single, okay, this is running man, let's do this structure, and there's no opponent, then those angles are more clear. But as soon as I put the opponent there, then certain things will change because I'm not fighting the mat, I'm fighting the opponent actually. And same with that certain hawking and keeping my shoulders off the mat. There weren't an opponent, so it kind of feels like 45-ish. But when their opponent, you can be lower, on your knees and higher. So I follow them with my shoulders. So those angles will change. So that's, I would say in retrospect, I hope I'm not lying actually, because I would say I always felt that I used more, but I couldn't explain it. So 45 was enough, but I knew that other things can happen, but it was a good way to start. And I think the mount was like, here is different. Here I have to be vertical. Wonder why, And then when we made that connection that top person wants, now it's really silly to say those things because it's so obvious. Then top person wants chest to chest, chest to back. How do we avoid that? You're turning your shoulder to the chest, so both planes are not available. And then you keep that angle according to how they move, and a lot of things will happen. So I'm super happy that we found constrained approach. And actually, the fun part is I thought about that game for 2 months. And it sounds really stupid because it's a very easy game. But I know I taught it in beginning of maybe August or in August overall somewhere. We did 2 weeks of this. And then I didn't have that game. And then just, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I did it again. Now we had a game. And so I've been thinking about it for 2 months. And so sometimes those constraints-led things will drive me nuts. But if you figure it out and game works, then it's like magic. So I'm happy I stumbled on a method actually that allows us to explore more. And, jokingly, I will always say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So universe talk to me, and then we have a method and I could continue my study because I wasn't stuck like fully, but also I was stuck a bit. And I think the method even allows me to go explore even deeper. Same as with a straight arm turtle, that I couldn't teach it with techniques. I can only teach it with constraints because it's very feeling based thing. So that's also like some kind of God spoke to me. And then now we can study more and we can expand on that 45 idea where it starts from.
That makes a lot of sense. And it kind of aligns with a pattern that I've felt myself when I start trying to put concepts together and explain jiu-jitsu in ideas. I often start off with more specific things like get a 45-degree angle. But then once I start thinking about all of the nuances that I might have missed, the idea becomes a bit more abstract and high level. And as you know, a lot of black belts like us, we tend to talk at a very high level because we've seen all of those weird examples and edge cases that proved us wrong in the past. And so we've adjusted our thinking to make it more general. And I think what you're saying here is right. If you're angled at a 45-degree angle relative to a person, that can be good advice if they're in a classically defined side control or even mount position. If you're on a traditional side control, to me, being 45 degrees is good because I don't want you to pin me chest to chest. And I also don't want to come up to my side and get kimura'd or armbarred. And similarly, if I am under you and you're mounted on me, going to a 90-degree angle can be bad if you're in a traditional mount on me because I give up a pathway to my back or I give up my top arm. But you're right that all of this assumes that the other person is in a textbook side control or mount, kind of the way that we teach it. In the real world, though, when we're training, the person on top is constantly moving and adjusting their angle, and they're not just going to sit there and let you get that 45-degree angle to them. So you have to be constantly moving along with them to make sure that your body lines up to theirs. And I like the way that you've explained this about making a capital T with your body as opposed to theirs. So you're always changing that angle and making sure it lines up. I guess I'll have to kind of adjust my database article about this concept because that is a good point. When the person on top is spinning around from one side to the other, if you just stay still 45 to the floor, they're going to find an opening. So you need to be adjusting yourself as they move.
Yeah, and that's the big thing with the constrained approach that I find very useful is we can teach the messiness. When you teach like technique-based, I wasn't that, we were part of the SPG, so we did some progressive drilling and everything else, and we already tried to not teach like just pure technique, so to speak. But now the constraint just allows us to teach right away this, angle chase, just a messiness. And that's how it looks. Before usually, let's say I taught it more clean, so to speak. And then we had the drills and stuff, and then messiness kicked in, and then we had to adjust and do better and explain it. And this is a natural thing that happens and blah, blah, blah. But now we can just right away do it the way it is. And the cleanliness comes out when certain strict positions will happen. And then maybe I do something strict also. But a lot of times, sparring is not chaos in a bad way, but it's not emotion. So the messiness part of that is very, very important. So even like when I would do it differently, maybe that we will start from messiness, following the angle. And then if something precise happens, we also have a precise angle. but I would go about it differently. Before I usually taught the angle and then maybe created the messiness. Right now we could just play with messiness, and then if they get us, certain specific grips more, then we can have more specific angles. So these days I play it more like this also. So it's been fun development.
One last thing I want to ask you, Priit. We talked earlier about how people probably aren't training defense as much as they should. And maybe part of the reason they're not getting better faster is because when you look at things through the lens of static techniques, you run the risk of not seeing kind of all of the fluid stuff that can happen as your opponent starts resisting and moving. But you also mentioned that you've come up with some constraints-based games that you use to teach this. What do those look like? I'm asking because if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, man, my defense could be a lot better and the traditional drilling method isn't helping me, they might want to know what these games look like. So feel free to share here. I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, but I think I can say the same game that top person, you want chest to chest, and bottom person, you want keep your chest and back away from them. So that's the first game. And I would even not add certain guard pulls. I would just say top person, try to, push them over, pull them over, manipulate their knees, pulling their elbows, whatever you have to do. We can sequence those games a little bit so there's different focus, but basically try to create chest to chest, chest to back. And in some point, if you have experienced that, then we also give a bottom person, let's say, the goal. Top person, stay top, stay, past the legs. That means stop control. Get chest to chest, chest to back. A bottom person, keep that chest to back away from them. And let's say try to pull guard. And you can give them also specific things. Try to get the one leg between your two legs, even the ankle, knee, or the hip. So that is because we want to harass the leg that's closest to the hips. That's usually the legs get tangled. So I will give them really simple idea. Get their one leg between your two legs. So now top person, you have to monitor the hips, block the hips, cover the hips, whichever way you want to say it. And you want to, we also call it the Greco-Roman sparring. You will shut down the legs basically so that they will not evolve. You will not let the knees between you and them. And then do that. Understand how your body has to be put so you can achieve that goal and look for chest to chest, chest to back. And now you have a way more realistic goal because you want to maintain the top and looking for those things. So, and we can also, change the bottom person. We now get to the butterfly, now get to the close guard. Or now the guard is free, pull any guard you want. So, and usually later, if chest to chest, chest to back happens to be very hard to get because the angle gets really good, then top person, you could add, if they're facing you, you could add a certain overhook grip. So you take an overhook from the top arm and around the head and you connect. It's like a sideways front headlock. That's a precursor for darces, anacondas, and everything, Peruvian neckties and everything like that. And if they're away from you, you can hunt for kimura or a seatbelt grip when your chest is basically on their shoulder. You don't need chest to chest. So you give them certain top position attacks that they can achieve. So top person, stay on top, blah, 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 cover the hips, get chest to chest, chest to back, or those extra ones I gave, and then you start to look for it. And you can incentivize maybe that if you get chest to chest, chest to back, I don't know, they do a push-up because it's a bigger win. You make their win bigger in their head, so they hunt that more maybe. They see it more, so there's more value. Then you can add the value differently. And that's how you actually develop really nice top game, so to speak. There people are looking for darces, looking for kimuras, looking for seatbelts, looking for pins, looking for back exposure, and simultaneously shutting down the legs. So that's basically side control, so to speak, top position to stay there forever and look for a grip. And that's what you need to do for the rest of your life. And what you also can add, if this becomes boring, you could have, now you can lock your legs around their head and an arm. That becomes like a mounted triangles, reverse triangles from the top. So you kind of go like, other one, you have other easier things to achieve. Those are, boring. And then try to find the ways to lock your legs around their head and arm. Yeah. So, and then you can also add different ones. You have to lock your arm and a leg. That means certain triangle precursors and also parataplatas and taricaplatas. So because those parataplata and taricaplata is basically connection your arm to the leg. So you're trying to find ways to connect your arm to the leg, so you have a kimura grip, but then game goes on, you have to attach your leg to that. So your arm is grabbing your leg. So you can add that. So you can build complexity there, give them more specific tasks. If the other tasks will be already, more easily achievable. And that will be like a easy side control. You train forever, very fighting oriented, very like you block the hip. Only thing you should add later is like the turtling options. That, let's say if they turtle, they win. So you want to also cancel the legs by covering the hips and also stop the turtling. So if you do that, you stay side control forever and figure out how to get something and go for submission. So in that way, jiu-jitsu is not really, really complex. That's the game and you play it forever.
Nice, man. Amazing. Well, if people want to learn more about your work or they want to follow you or ask you questions or study your material, how would they go about doing that?
Well, social media, I show where I am, what I do, social media, Instagram more in my stories. Facebook is differently like my blog. I will notify my bookings, some kind of what I discover stuff. So there's DVDs. So what else is there? Obviously, Defensive BJJ. But sadly, I'm trying to get back to it. And this is I don't like it at the moment because I fell off routine because of my kid's illness. And I'm really want to get back, but my life is a little bit also steady, a little bit chaotic. So I have very hard time actually finding a steady routine I can keep. So definitely Defensive BJJ is there, but I'm not active at the moment there. But like, I don't know, anytime soon I will be there. Because still I feel I have to do a lot of work there and I want to contribute. But yeah, so that's a little bit sad to say, but it is what it is. So, but I'm pretty sure that you will find me there really soon. So those are the things. So DVDs, Globetrotter videos, Globetrotter in action, Priit Mihkelson. You find, I guess, a lot of stuff I've done. Watch my recent stuff first and, what I've done earlier back in 2017, that watch later because I've changed also. So yeah, Globetrotter, DVDs, Defensive BJJ, social media, and that's about it. I had also t-shirt stuff if somebody wanted to support. We had a dedicated grappler store. Now it was also a temporarily Etsy store, but at the moment I think it's down. We have some issues. So I will let people know when that's happening, but you could also support me and see what I do and spread the word, so to speak, using some turtle and make defense sexy DVD, so t-shirts. But at the moment that's sadly down, but I think you can check it still out. And if it's up, we will notify. So those are the things I think you can find me, so to speak.
Amazing. Well, as I do, Prit, I will put those links in the show notes to make it easy for people to find that stuff. Everything that we make lives at BJJmentalmodels.com. That's where you can get all of the episodes of the podcast, both our full-length episodes like this one and also our mini episodes on concepts, completely free. You can also sign up for our newsletter, again, completely free. And we've got a whole database of mental models for jiu-jitsu on there that's free as well. Kicking things up to the next level, you'll want to join BJJ Mental Models Premium. That is how we pay the bills around here. It's the reason why we don't have advertisements. It is our premium subscribers that fund BJJ Mental Models and make all of this possible. If you join Premium, you're going to get the world's largest library of jiu-jitsu courses on strategy, tactics, concepts, mindset, philosophy. The thing that makes us different is we focus more on big picture ideas to try to fill in the gaps that you're not going to get in a traditional class or traditional instructional. You'll also get access to premium ongoing podcasts. Emily Kwok's podcast, if you're a fan of her, the only way to hear that is on BJJ Mental Models Premium. We've also got a great podcast from Drew Foster that breaks down everything you need to know about the state of the meta in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what's evolving and happening on the competition scene. And we've got a lot more coming soon as well. So we're really trying to make this the most inclusive bundle that you can get if you want to build up the mental game in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You'll also get access to what is, in my opinion, the best community that you will find online when it comes to Jiu-Jitsu. A lot of people keep their membership just for the community alone. And of course, if you want to go up to the next level with us, we also have coaching tiers for people who want to get direct rolling reviews and coaching from quite literally some of the best black belts in the world, like Brianna St. Marie or Margot Ciccarelli. Also, you can go to our pro tier. And if you are building out a jiu-jitsu business, we are expanding and leveraging a lot of the stuff that we have done to make BJJ Mental Models successful. And I'm exposing that now to other people so that we can kind of help take off of their plate a lot of the painful things about running a business, like managing sales, marketing, lead generation, product, websites. We can take a lot of that over for you. So again, all of that is at bjjmentalmodels.com. Please do consider joining Premium if you haven't already. It makes a big difference. Thanks a lot, Prit. This was an awesome one. Always love having you here, man. And I think this is a really cool, interesting conversation on a part of defense that not many people talk about.
I hope, yeah. So like, always we say what we talk about, we don't know, maybe we pull it off, but I've learned to trust you, and you are a very good host and listener. And somehow we talked again over an hour. So thumbs up. So kudos to you, Steve.
Kudos to you too, sir. Thank you so much. And as always, thanks to the listeners. I really do appreciate everyone who subscribes and follows and interacts with us and consumes all of this. It really does mean a lot. So thank you for that, and we'll talk to you soon.